Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Kickback Comics. My name is Antonio.
My name is Ben, and this is a comic book podcast.
By two guys who have not read a lot of comics in their lives, but are looking to get involved, learn some cool stuff, and read some good stories.
Yeah, this is, reading comics is our new hobby, and you guys are along for the ride.
Along for the ride, indeed. And this is going to be an interesting episode because we're starting with one of my favorite superheroes, one of the superheroes I started with when I was a kid, video games, movies. If you ever come to my house, which you probably won't, there's going to be photos that my mom has of me in like a Spider-Man costume.
Oh, I just saw this. I actually just saw this. No, I didn't even see you in a Spider-Man costume, but I saw you and our friend Griff
yeah.
on the gram.
Back when we were youths.
You're posing with Spider-Man.
Yes.
One of you guys is attempting.
Yeah, I think that's me. I think I'm attempting the...
Your face is dead serious, and you're attempting the web thwip.
Well, I was dead serious about Spider-Man, I'm sure. I think the web, what'd you say?
Thwip.
Yeah, the thwip. Yeah, indeed.
That's the sound it makes, which we can talk about later. Spider-Man's webs go thwip.
Yes, they do. That's very true. So anyway, this is one of my favorite characters, and this is a new, very interesting take on this story. But what about you, Ben? What has Spider-Man been for your life?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, Spider-Man is he's iconic. He's one of the most iconic characters around. If you think about it, like he's
an ice cream.
Yeah, he's an ice cream. He's on pajamas. There's all this crazy stuff, right? So a big thing with that was I obviously am not an expert on the Marvel lore, but I read a book or two about the history of the comics industry, and one of the things was Marvel was actually going like bankrupt. This was like a big thing, right? And one of the big things, they sold off so much of their catalog. Like that's how they sold off the X-Men. That's why there's like 20th Century Fox or whatever made all the X-Men movies when we were growing up. They sort of got rid of the, so many different characters, right? They also famously, they sold Spider-Man to Sony.
Right. Yeah. Which is why that they can make those games now.
Right. So that's why they were making the games. That's why, there's this whole thing where Tom Holland is in the MCU is sort of like on lease.
Right.
Like they have, they're the whole way that he was brought into the MCU was like Sony wouldn't sell him back to Marvel, but they'll share him. And so they're making their like terrible, spider villain movies or whatever they're trying to do, and then Tom Holland is just like caught in the middle of these two companies, right? So part of that's all the history of like that was part of the thing is just Spider-Man has a ridiculous amount of value just because of how omnipresent his brand is. And think about it, like little kids, it's one of those characters where like he's on your pajamas, he's on your
shirts, like I said, ice cream. If that ice cream truck's coming around the corner or whatever else, there's gonna be Spider-Man. Up there with like
SpongeBob.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. SpongeBob,
very obviously like we're
cultural,
right? SpongeBob is a
and
recent.
Spider-Man's even longer, right?
So exactly, which is actually
staple.
Okay,
the staple from the original times, and Spider-Man.
Yeah, this is a good moment for us to like jump to the dossier actually from what you just said already. One thing I feel like I should acknowledge at some point is I'm just getting over that cold that every single person in Los Angeles has had. So my voice is still coming back to me.
You get a great rasp.
I got a real good rasp going on right now, but I don't really have much control over it. So I bet it's going to like crack and be nasty.
That'll be good.
Yeah, cool. We're rocking with it anyway. So basically, we can jump over to the dossier real quick and look at some like general history of Spider-Man the character, facts and figures. So, Spider-Man was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Stan Lee was the writer and Steve Ditko was the artist.
Wow.
Yeah, and the first appearance of Spider-Man was in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in August of
1962.
1962, bro.
That's an old man. No, it's not that old, but he's pretty old.
Yeah, well, he's sort of like a forever teenager.
Yeah.
Except in what we're reading right now.
We're reading today, yeah,
right,
crazy.
Which is part of the whole exception, but we're going to get to that. So,
this origin story, high school student, not anymore.
Yeah, not currently. So yeah, I mean, Spider-Man has been, this is one of these things where that's like a larger conversation about how superhero storytelling in general is sort of like this modern American like pantheon. Like humans have been telling each other stories about, another perfect example, like, the Greek gods and whatever. We still have tons of stories that are relevant about that, but it's like, a cast of demigods, superhero, like people that can do amazing things that we can't do. And we just sort of tell each other human stories with these more than human characters,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like this, a much more, kind of intense, obviously, storytelling, but it's a lot of things with powers, superhuman abilities that also go through these very human experiences as well. And this is life lessons. These are morals at the end of the story, right? It's a lot of this, again, storytelling that's been passed down for a long, long time, which is super interesting that we're about to experience it in comic form.
Right. And so Spider-Man specifically, right? Like we can, he's like a Hercules or whatever, like, but he's one of these guys, he's like distinctly American. He's from New York. You know what I mean? He's been around since the 1960s.
Red, white, and blue.
Yeah. He literally is in like straight up. His colors he has some like strong American colors going on with this man.
He does.
But, Spider-Man is, he's a literal icon. He's an icon, and he has been for generations. That's the point. It's one of these things where there's been so many different stories over the years about this character, but there's fundamental qualities that he represents.
Yes.
That sort of, it's like, he has a whole symbology that people can relate to, like someone with a Spider-Man t-shirt or someone who relates to Spider-Man. It's like people, young men in America were relating, or young women, whatever. I don't need to gender it, but young people in America were relating to Spider-Man in the 60s and 70s, and the same way that kids right now in the 2020s.
Yeah, crazy.
Coming up on the later 2020s.
I know, what a world.
It's the same. It's
the same kind of thing where kids are still getting a lot of. That's why we fall in love with characters, right? Is they have qualities that we kind of, I feel like, in a lot of times wish that we showed more of ourselves, right? Spider-Man, it's about courage. It's about a lot of times it's about honesty. It's about caring about the relationships with the people that are close to you, protecting the people that are close to you, doing the right thing, even though it's hard, right? These are very important and powerful things that are in a lot of different places, but are definitely in Spider-Man as well.
Yep. Like the classic Spider-Man line that a lot of people know is, with great power comes great responsibility. That line was originally delivered to Peter Parker, which is the actual name of, that's like
Spider-Man.
That's his real identity. But that line was delivered by his uncle all the way back in the 1960s. And, it's still always a huge part.
Right. That is the core. Definitely one of the cores of what I think even Spider-Man represents nowadays, where it's, it really is like when you are given the ability to do good things, to make change, to do whatever for the world, it is your responsibility to make those choices. It's
literally one of those things. Like my dad says, like a twist on this. He definitely doesn't think about Spider-Man at all when he says it, but he says, like, to whom the most is given, the most is expected.
Very same. I'm sure this is probably one of these things where it's like, I bet this sentiment just shows up in like forever. Proverbs, like all over the world, for all of time.
Back in ancient Egypt.
But that even shows that it's like, these are, like you said, American pantheon, whatever you want to call it, right? This kind of ever-flowing, powerful characters that teach us how to be greater versions of ourselves. And I think the cool thing also about Spider-Man, and this is, I think, in some of the best comics, right, is it's like, who are you also like without the mask on, right? It's like you have, even being a regular person, or quote unquote regular person, whatever you want to think that is, you have the ability to affect, the world around you and do good things. You don't need the mask.
Yeah.
But the mask can help. For Spider-Man, at least.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, let's all get masks. That's the takeaway.
That's the takeaway.
Yeah. Hide your identity and you too can do good things.
That's usually how that works.
Yikes. Oh my gosh. But okay, so let's just run quickly through some of these facts that I've prepared here. So just running, we just sort of talked about his origin story, but we can briefly just run through the classic Spider-Man tale. Peter Parker, he's a high school student. He's in Queens, New York. He gets spider-like abilities after he's getting bit by a radioactive spider. And then his uncle dies. We already talked about that. Uncle Ben dies and tells him that with great power comes great responsibility. And then that starts Spider-Man on this whole arc of, he has these newfound abilities. He's shooting webs. He's climbing on walls, and he decides to not only that he has the option to try to do something good about that, he has the obligation to do something with
the obligation. It really is like this thing, and I think that this is a great example also of like, and this is any kind of like good arc with this, is that it's a superhero, but it's two parts, and overnight maybe he becomes super, but the kind of experience of the comics is watching him become a real hero in the same sense,
right? Because he's just a kid, and that's another like key thing about Spider-Man is Peter Parker was one of the first teen superheroes, or maybe the first teen superhero who wasn't a sidekick. There was almost always like a young Ward, like Batman and Robin.
The young Ward, yes.
Yeah, which is like kind of, there's a whole other conversation to have about that dynamic popping up over and over in superhero stories. But this was the first time where the young kid was the main guy. And he was his mask was. Like his mask moves a lot. It's not just like this thing. Like he expresses. He has a lot of emotions.
And they do that a lot in the new MCU. That's like a very big thing with their Spider-Man.
Totally. His eyes are moving. Like as we already touched on before, Spider-Man was basically what saved Marvel from bankruptcy in the 1990s, and that was through merchandising sales. They just plastered the Spider-Man iconography on everything.
That makes so much sense.
And they made so much money. He's just sort of, there's been some notable writers like Stan Lee. He's a Marvel icon. He was the original co-creator. Steve Ditko was the other co-creator and original artist. We touched on that earlier. Some other like notable writers were Jerry Conway. He was the one who, like the death of Gwen Stacy. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point, but that was like a huge deal. That was one of the first times where like a character's love interest just got killed.
Yeah.
This is mostly like children's storytelling back then. It wasn't really as mature as some of these stories are now, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, big twist.
There's Brian Michael Bendis. He created the original Ultimate Spider-Man run in 2000. That was a really big deal. Dan Slott is the longest running modern writer. He wrote the Spider-Man arc from 2008 all the way through 2018.
Wow,
so that's another thing with comics, right? That's wild and different from a lot of other mediums is these stories will go on for literal years. The continuity will be like chapter 1 will happen 10 years ago. And instead of the author writing a whole book and then publishing the story, it's like the
installments.
Yeah, they're getting published a chapter at a time over literal years, which is part of what can make comics really inaccessible and difficult. Because if you want to jump in, you're like, oh, hey, I'm going to the comic book store. What should I read? I like Spider-Man. I'll be like, okay, well, if you want to start at the beginning of the story, you got to go back and find this issue from literally 10 years ago.
Right.
Or you can jump
if you're going really from the beginning, you got to get into the depths and
go to the
probably
60s.
Spend a chunk of change unless you're, I don't know, getting the PDF online. But yeah.
Right. So some little sales figures here. It's one of the best-selling comic book characters globally ever. Little fun fact: Amazing Fantasy number 15, which is that first issue. Yeah, it sold for over 3.6 million.
So that's what I was saying
in 2021. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
These things it just shows you the value of this character. This character.
Yeah,
yeah, it's wild. He's consistently a top selling superhero for Marvel.
Yeah, I see hundreds of millions of copies, obviously. Especially nowadays, right? We talked about this a little bit in the first episode about how the MCU has, I think, reignited a kind of like interesting, probably new collection of people to be interested in comics, or at least to take a look at comics, right? And Spider-Man has been very much. I mean, I think probably one of the big introductions to superhero movies again in like the 2000s were those Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire and. Yeah, what a fun time that was. Oh man, yeah. Tobey Maguire was my first Spider-Man. The thing that was actually really, really funny was when I was growing, my sort of Spider-Man origin story of exposure to the character was when my brother and I were really little, my mom didn't really let us watch much television or movies. Not even really as like a content issue, but she just didn't really want us on screens like that. Sure. Which, I respect now, right? How times have changed. Like far from iPad kids, she didn't even want us to be like VHS kids or whatever. But regardless, I remember we went and visited my grandparents, and my little cousin Chase, he was running around the house with a floss, like throwing floss. Oh, sure,
being like, I'm Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I was like, Mom, the little cousin has seen the Spider-Man movie.
I gotta see the Spider-Man movies.
And she
yeah.
was like, okay. And so I got that. I rented that thing that night and watched it. And
There you go.
It was I still remember that whole night. I remember where we got ice cream. I remember
wow.
we found
See, there you go.
found the DVD. We watched it on someone's laptop
Right.
at my grandparents' house. And yeah,
Yeah,
I will forever remember that.
Right. What an exciting time. Yeah, I feel like I honestly think that probably my first introduction was through the like 1999 or like 2000 like video game on like a PC. And that one, I don't know if anybody else has played it. They probably have, but Stan Lee narrates that whole game too, which is kind of like a very interesting introduction and he has such an iconic voice too for that whole kind of thing. But so that was where I really got into it. And then those Sam Raimi directed by Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies were super fun and
they still hold up.
They hold up in such a like interestingly like kind of almost like campy way now, which is so fun.
Yeah. I actually haven't watched them in a long time, but that's this
I think I watched them last year.
Oh no way. Okay,
yeah.
It worked. So yeah, this conversation is definitely making me wanna
I know. Go visit them.
I gotta add that to the list. So that's actually I want to sort of pivot our conversation to the original Ultimate Spider-Man run. Even what Ultimate what do you mean Ultimate Spider-Man? The Amazing Spider-Man. Like these are things
he was always ultimate. What's so ultimate now?
Right, exactly.
Tell us.
Right. So there's sometimes there'll be different like ongoing Spider-Man stories happening at the same time, and they'll be delineated with different titles, basically. So the Amazing Spider-Man is like there's very often Amazing Spider-Man run going on. But so in the late 1990s, Marvel's main universe, which is technically Earth 616, I have here in the notes, which I'm sure a lot of comic book nerds are like, obviously it's Earth 616. Like, how do you even need to check the notes to know? But yeah, so the main Marvel storyline had literally decades of continuity at that point. It was really difficult for new readers, and Marvel was feeling that from like an actual business sense. They're like, how do we get people to jump into these stories? They've been going for so long. And so basically they decided they were going to do a new reboot. They were going to reboot all the Marvel characters. They gave them modern origins. So like, for example, Iron Man, back in the day, his origin was like completely distinct. In like when they made the Ultimate Universe, it's sort of like the Tony Stark we know now, where his origin has to do with war in the Middle East.
Right.
It's sort of like instead of Vietnam or whatever. Again, that's
bringing
like
it into the
It's the
new age.
Yeah, and it's sort of like Iraq or Afghanistan is like our equivalent of Vietnam for the next generation. So they're always finding ways, like these characters stay the same, but even as they update, we just find new modern
new stories to tell with the same kind of core values and core mechanics.
Right. Exactly. But so basically Ultimates was their solution. And so they did Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate everything. They just did like a full reboot. And so that way people would get all excited about it, and they could have like, okay, you can jump on. I actually am not sure if they stopped publishing original continuity stuff as well. I think maybe they just pared it down and then also published Ultimate, and that was like the big push.
Interesting. That would be something. Somebody look that up now, and we'll also look it up after this.
Yeah, berate us in the comments.
Please
Tell us all the stuff we don't know.
Yeah, please.
But yeah, so basically the original Ultimate Run was just this big reboot, modern origins, newly accessible to readers. It reflected modern culture, tech, like Spider-Man had a flip phone or whatever. I don't even know I don't know where it is on the tech timeline, but all that type of stuff. It was also just sort of generally grittier, more cinematic. It sort of was just trying to update the storytelling to be more appealing to people in the early 2000s versus sort of like a 1980s aesthetic or whatever.
Right.
So that's the original Ultimate Spider-Man. And as we mentioned earlier, Ultimate Spider-Man eventually spoiler for a story from the year 2001.
Oh yeah, spoiler from earlier, Uncle Ben dies.
Yeah.
Sorry if you didn't know that, but anyway.
Oh wow, yeah, Uncle Ben dies real quick. It's usually the first couple pages. But yeah, so or maybe not the first couple pages. I don't know what I'm talking about. People are going to be...
they're going to come after you.
They're after me.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not. No one's going to listen, but it's cool.
You never know.
You never know. They might be after us. Spoiler alert for a story from literally the early 2000s, but in that original Ultimate Run, Peter Parker eventually dies. He really dies.
Right.
And he gets replaced by Miles Morales.
The man himself.
The man himself. We mentioned that earlier, but yeah, so that was sort of everybody's first introduction to Miles. I think it was probably controversial at the time in the way you can imagine, where people were like, "Oh, why you gotta make Spider-Man black? What which is ridiculous." But that was the original. That was the original Miles. And what's interesting is they eventually, when they ended the Ultimate Universe and brought everything back over into another storyline, basically when they were ready to do the next reboot, which I think was in like, let me see, it says Ultimate Spider-Man ran from 2000 to 2009. Ultimate X-Men, 2001 to 2009. The Ultimates, which was basically the Avengers, that was 2002 to 2011. Ultimate Fantastic Four, that was 2004 to 2009. So basically, like 2009, 2010, they reset the Ultimates. They let it go for like 10 years, and then it was time for another, new decade,
another
new
story
thing.
to come in. Yeah.
But they brought Miles over.
Right.
Miles jumped ship. So he was one of the only characters that like switched universes, survived the collapse
What a
of
guy.
the Ultimate. Yeah. And,
What a guy.
And we're glad he did.
Yeah.
Glad they didn't just
great movies.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen him,
yeah. Miles Morales is only growing. Only growing in
popularity.
And he's one of these interesting characters where he has, he's distinct from Peter Parker, but in a lot of the larger thematic ways, they're the same thing, right? The core values are the same, sort of through a different lens, which is just so cool.
Right, and it also fits. I mean, I can't remember where I saw Stan Lee saying this. I'm sure he said it a bunch of times, right? But I think that it really incorporates this idea of like, Spider-Man is, and I think this goes for a lot of superheroes, whatever else, but Spider-Man especially is like this idea of, what makes Spider-Man are the values, right? It's the values and the core principles. And I can't remember when he said this, and if he didn't say this and I'm wrong, somebody can get me. But
we're doing that too much, bro.
But he said
we're
talking to the audience too much.
No, not talking to the audience too much, but we're like being like, oh well, we, what's the word?
We already did the disclaimer, I guess, at the beginning that we don't know.
Yeah, we are not experts.
We're not experts.
Experts.
But what I did hear is that Stan Lee said, the idea that anybody could wear the mask, right? And again, so that's the thing, is that it's not about exactly who the person is, what they look like, where they come from, whatever else. It's about the principles, the ideals, and the themes that make Spider-Man Spider-Man, or whatever other Spider person there is.
And I mean, and that's the whole thing in the current Miles Morales movies, Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. We're waiting on the third one. The third one, I'm sure there's been delays apparently, but it's cooking.
Yeah.
But the whole another thing with Spider-Man is there's like a multi-Spider-Verse. Multiverses are almost overpopular these days. It's kind of like a meme.
I mean, really, thanks to, in some ways, at least the uber popularity, probably at least a little bit from the Marvel universe as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. But the part of the premise of that is that every universe has a Spider-Man. Like there's all these different parallel situations where it's not always Peter Parker, but there's going to be a dude that gets bit by a spider whose uncle or dad or of that, fatherly parental figure dies, tells him that you got it, with great power comes great responsibility. And then there's always a Spider-Man swinging around.
Yep.
It's always going to happen. Maybe it's it's any.
Doesn't matter. It could be anybody.
Could be anybody.
In all the universes, there's a Spider-Man that comes around.
Right. And that's a big, I don't know that that's necessarily true of of everybody in the Marvel world. It's like, it's kind of like the multiple versions of Spider-Man is kind of, in a weird way, a Spider-Man thing.
Yeah, Spider-Man thing. That's actually very true. I hadn't thought about that. Great costumes too.
Oh yeah, totally. You can just switch some things up.
Should we get into the comic?
Totally. So I think, now we can sort of wrap up that larger Spider-Man conversation and all the context, and we just gave the context of the original Ultimates run. So now here we are in 2025, and this is when they're doing Ultimates again. They've run it back.
Rebooted in 2024. Ultimate reboot.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, exactly. New whole Ultimate Universe. There's
new.
Yeah, so this one apparently is a whole new continuity. It doesn't actually connect to the original one, except for, I think, I haven't read enough to know, but I think one of the main villains actually is going to be a guy from the original Ultimates run.
Interesting.
One of the few other characters like Miles that made it out of that universe.
Right.
But basically, this run is called Ultimate Spider-Man Married with Children. And this one this one subverts so many of those classic Spider-Man characteristics we were talking about before. I mean, it carries through with a lot of them. Characteristics is the wrong thing, but in
the story kind of base story elements, and we'll get into this. I mean, we'll get into it, and you'll understand immediately what we mean by that. So we're reading Ultimate Spider-Man Married with Children, and what we have here is multiple issues of this comic in kind of one book, and I do not know exactly what this is called. So Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. So, as far as I understand, this is what I have here in my hands. Here, I'll flip the pages so you guys can hear it. ASMR. Yeah. So this is called a trade paperback. Which, a lot of people, some of us, I used to think, oh yeah, that's a graphic novel.
Right.
When you see it on the shelf at Barnes & Noble or whatever, you think like, okay, the comics are the little tiny things, and then that's but actually in reality, I mean, some books are graphic novels. Some things are published sort of in that form, and the authors want them to be considered more like a book or whatever. But this is literally a collection of individual issues. Mm-hmm. So if we were trying to read this story, one way we could do it is we could go to our, maybe this comic gets published once a month, something like that. We could go to our local comic book store and collect it and buy it issue by issue. Or you can wait for that issue to wrap up, and then eventually the publishing company will re-release it in this collection. So this one has, it says right here on the back, it's collecting Ultimate Spider-Man 2024 issues 1 through 6.
Mm-hmm. 1 through 6.
And yeah, so then this is sort of like essentially a volume 1, and then
right.
Volume 2 will be 7 through whatever
12 or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And so. This is very interesting. I mean, this story definitely subverts your expectations from the jump. And I think, here's the question: do we want to dive into the story right away, or do we want to dive into our points?
Yeah, I mean, we can. Let's talk about the story, but we can also just. I think we could first off, maybe we read this earlier, but we can just circle back that the current writer. This is Ultimate Spider-Man, Married with Children, written by Jonathan Hickman. And there's actually 2 artists, credited artists in this, which we're going to get into later. The main artist is Marco Cicchetto. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for helping me with that. We assume that's his name. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Marco Cicchetto and David Messina. Mm-hmm. Then the other credited people are the color artist is Matthew Wilson, mm-hmm. and the letterer is Corey Petit, something like that. Our boy Corey.
And obviously, original Spider-Man creators, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko as well. It's interesting. I mean, I think that, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of the, core pieces of this, right? I think that we have this importance of purpose, this importance of responsibility, importance of family, the connections that are close to you. But in this case, it's actually very interesting because way more people close to Spider-Man, I feel like, are alive. And there's more people, I feel like, that are close to him.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the main sort of premise or gimmick, the way that they're turning the story on the head is right from the first page. You open it up and you see Peter Parker is
teen.
He's not a teen. He's a full grown man. So basically, our story, it's sort of one of the things that we talked a lot about when we were discussing this comic was has a lot of non-chronological storytelling. Mm-hmm. It sort of jumps around in time. But so we literally open with Peter Parker,
married with kids.
Yeah,
there you go.
Married with children. There it is. But yeah, he's got 2 kids and he's married to Mary Jane. Those crazy kids made it.
Yeah, they did make it. Yeah,
they made it.
In every universe, or maybe not every universe, but enough of them.
Yeah, sometimes, as we'll get to later, there's also he has a whole cast of. He's got Gwen Stacy.
Right.
He's got Black Cat.
He's
That's
got his whole thing going on. But in this issue, he's locked down.
He's locked in.
Married with children.
Wifed
Mary
up.
Jane, cute kids, all that kind of stuff. And one of the other biggest, I feel like, twists for me off the beginning is Uncle Ben. Still alive. He runs into the paper. J. Jonah Jameson, obviously always around, great.
Right.
But Uncle Ben is there, working at the Daily Bugle.
Yeah, alongside Peter. And another thing with this that's interesting is traditionally J. Jonah Jameson is he's Peter's boss. Mm-hmm. He has to get a job. He's in high school. He leaves high school, whatever. He has to make money in New York. He has to pay rent. The way he does that often is he works for the Daily Bugle.
He's a photographer for the Daily Bugle.
And specifically, he gets photos of Spider-Man.
Yeah, it was just such a classic.
He always knows where to find him.
Yeah, he gets the shots that nobody else can, and nobody knows how. But J. Jonah Jameson, what's so funny is that normally he's definitely much more of a brash.
Yeah, he's borderline an antagonist. I
Yeah.
mean, they're kind of
He
on
is
the
a-
same time, but it's like that whole plot line is like, oh, a difficult, mean boss.
Right.
Like,
Difficult mean boss, and then also, he does at the very least in the beginning. Spider-Man, he like paints him as like a villain.
yeah,
the whole idea.
that big whole thing is he's like, oh, everybody,
vigilante.
yeah, everybody thinks Spider-Man's a hero, but really he's a masked menace.
Right.
Oh.
Exactly. And so in this story, what's different? We've got Uncle Ben alive, and J. Jonah Jameson is like a regular guy
Yeah,
who's
he's
like not terrible.
Way tempered down.
Yes.
It's like Uncle Ben being alive in this timeline. Ben and J. Jonah Jameson are like
They're boys.
They're very close friends.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like, Jonah is like another father type figure to Peter in some ways. They have like a much better relationship.
Very much better relationship. Absolutely.
So that's definitely a big change off the bat. The other big change is he's not Spider-Man.
Yes.
This is just Peter Parker.
How could we forget that big change? He's not even Spider-Man.
He's literally not Spider-Man. Not only that,
Spider-Man doesn't exist.
there is no Spider-Man. So that's that as we understand it, is the whole premise with this ultimate launch, is this ultimate run, is basically, I think it's the same is true for a lot of other heroes. But basically, the villain, the ultimate villain, whoever that may end up
whoever
being,
that may be.
he went through the timeline and carefully made it so that the classic origin story
Those
of all
canon
the major
events.
Marvel heroes just didn't happen. So we, presumably there is no Captain America, there is no Black Panther. Like
Right.
all these different places in the world, they can sort of just be running the show because they made sure, like on the day that radioactive spider was gonna
Right,
bite
they
Peter,
scooped it up and threw it outside or stomped on it or whatever else.
whatever, they scooped it for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell us how Peter ends up becoming Spider-Man in this version.
Yeah, so in this version, it's really kind of like it's almost kind of funny how like out of nowhere it is, but there's this, what is it? I guess it's like some ball or something like that he's either given or like appears, and basically he ends up being visited by this kind of like apparition of Iron Man, who tells him that this universe or whatever else has been is broken and is not the way that it's supposed to be, and that he's meant to be Spider-Man. One of the things that I think Peter talks about early on in this as well is that he feels like there's something missing from his life. There's something more that he's supposed to be, and he can't quite put his finger on it. And then this ends up happening, and we start jumping around in time where there's he's talking to Mary Jane about this a little bit, not the eventually becoming Spider-Man, but about finding this little piece of technology. And so Iron Man comes and talks to him, basically says, you're supposed to be Spider-Man.
Yeah, right here it says.
Gives him the well, I guess in this case it's not even a radioactive spider.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
I think it's a genetically modified spider.
Right, it's a different. The specifics of the spider we don't know, but or maybe we do, and I just don't know them. But he says here, you were supposed to have a different life, Peter Parker. You were supposed to protect the innocent, save lives, and inspire the citizens of this world to be their best selves. And instead, all of that was taken from you. And basically gives him the choice: do you want that life back? Do you think you're going to do it? Another thing that I think is really cool storytelling is this kind of, again, relates it to like very, very normal real life situations. Basically what ends up happening at Peter Parker's work is there's like a takeover by a larger company, there, and they decide that they're sort of the morality of their journalism is going to change.
It's definitely in question now.
And so as a result, Uncle Ben and Jonah Jameson, they leave, they quit.
Yeah, they say we're not no more Daily Bugle. Another crazy twist.
Right.
Jonah not at the Daily Bugle.
And they jump out to go start their own company themselves, their own paper.
Yeah.
And Peter is like, oh, I have a family. I need stability. I have kids. I need health care.
Right.
I can't go join this startup. So even fundamentally, that's like a relatable thing that a lot of us can understand in different stages of life. It's like, are you going to take this conventional, safer path that just you kind of just feel in your bones isn't doing it for you?
Right. It's just that there's something, again, it's like there's some piece of this that's missing. There's some greater purpose or whatever else that's missing. And so Peter, luckily in his case, is able to be given that purpose and realize that there is something missing in his life. He gets bitten by the spider, and then we get this great shot of him standing on a building, kind of Interestingly enough, I think in this one he also starts in the black Spider-Man suit, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, he does. He starts in the.
But he turns into Spider-Man.
He turns into
becomes his
Spider-Man.
first moment as Spider-Man.
And on that page where he's making that decision, he's got a little spider in a vial. He's deciding if he's going to do it. It flashes back to a pivotal conversation he's had with Uncle Ben and a pivotal conversation he's had with Mary Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it sort of all comes together. So I guess I'd say even just this, and then the final page is there's a beautiful.
A shot in the city. You've got birds flying all around, sunset in the background. His silhouette is against the city skyline. Looks like a powerful guy.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's they pack a lot of storytelling into this just first issue. They establish the whole, different continuity, the sort of upside down, reversed, out of order Peter Parker origin, and they don't.
And they give us at least a first taste at a villain too with Fisk.
Yeah, Wilson Fisk. He's
the Kingpin.
The Kingpin. He's sort of one of these characters, like a well-known Marvel villain. He's sort of traditionally he's like a Spider-Man villain and a Daredevil villain.
Right.
I think originally or primarily a Daredevil villain, but he's one of these sort of New York thugs, but sort of business. He has a side of him that is accepted in the
in
wealthy
upper echelon.
Yeah, exactly. But really, he's running. He's like the mafia. He's like the mob.
He's the mob guy, the guy.
Yeah, exactly. Who's like paying off all the lawyers and everything.
Right, paying off the lawyers, and it's his company that's taking over the Daily Bugle, right, and is shifting the narrative of what trying to shift the narrative of what New York thinks about Fisk, what they think about his companies. And really just change everybody's perspective on him. So
that's sort of, we'll keep talking. We're going to keep talking, and we're going to keep spoiling the story to some extent. But also, we definitely want to encourage any of you listeners to check this out. That's part of what we're going to jump around. I don't think we're going to necessarily, certainly the next episode we record isn't going to be on the continuation of this story.
Yes.
At least in the beginning, we're going to sort of hop around and sample a bunch of different comics.
Experience the world take our sampler platter from the world of comics.
Right. And eventually, I think as we figure this out, our hope is that we'll lock onto some run of comics, maybe not even superhero comics. We'll decide what that first one's going to be, but we'll try to go a little bit slower, a little bit more in detail, and hopefully have some number of listeners. Probably initially just going to be friends of ours, but we'll sort of read it together.
Yeah.
But we can definitely recommend, this is an ongoing story. We're going to definitely, I think both of us on our own, we're just going to keep reading this.
Yes.
And we want to know where the story goes, and we definitely would recommend that you guys, especially if you've never read a Spider-Man comic before, but you kind of just know about the guy, you kind of know
it's a fun place to start. And not only is it cool to experience the story, but you get to subvert some expectations too, which makes it a whole kind of new journey with some old good classic themes in there. All right, I'm locking in now. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're back from a little break. We're talking about Ultimate Spider-Man today, the new Ultimate Spider-Man starting in 2024. And I thought before we jump into our little bit of analysis on each of the issues that we've gone through here, I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a narrative breakdown pretty quickly, maybe not too quickly, but quickly enough, of each of these issues here. So this overall paperback here is called Married with Children. And it follows Peter Parker, who is not Spider-Man in the beginning, into becoming Spider-Man, and then a lot of developing stories off of that. So we start with our first issue in January, and we learn that Peter Parker is not a teen. He's in his, I think, 30s now. He's got a family. He's married to Mary Jane, 2 kids. He works still at the Daily Bugle, but when they head to the Daily Bugle, you end up learning that not only is Uncle Ben still alive, but J. Jonah Jameson, almost more surprisingly, J. Jonah Jameson is a nice person in this book, and he's actually friends with Uncle Ben, knows Peter very well, is kind of like another father-ish type figure in addition to Uncle Ben. And actually also in this story, May is the one who's passed away.
Right.
Interestingly enough, she does not, I guess, get her moment in the limelight as of yet, but one of Peter's children is also named May after her.
Yeah, it's probably, it sort of seems like it's like a old age natural causes. Maybe she was sick. I don't remember if it says specifically, but it's not like she got shot by a
Right.
vigilante or something like that.
Right,
She
or-
just,
yeah.
in a sort of the normal way you would lose a loved one. Yeah, it sort of seems like that's the May situation.
Yeah, indeed. And then also we end up learning that, Uncle Ben again is alive, but Norman Osborn, who, if you've read some of the other comics or seen some of the movies, is the father of Harry Osborn, and the big man in charge at Oscorp, one of the big companies in this universe, and in the many Spider-Man universes. He is dead, and later on we'll learn about kind of how that went on. But one of the kind of big things that goes on in this first issue is that Peter is very dissatisfied with his life. He has a couple of talks with Uncle Ben and Mary Jane about how he just feels like something is missing from his life, whether that be purpose or whatever else. Something is missing. We also in this first issue get introduced to some kind of first main villains, Kingpin and his sidekick is maybe not the exact word,
Henchman,
but his henchman side guy Bullseye are introduced.
That's another Daredevil villain.
Yes,
that was one of the villains. Kingpin and Bullseye were the villains in the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie from when we were kids.
Right, yeah. I feel like I haven't even seen that movie. I've just seen like the.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah, it's a trip. Some of it's really cool.
Didn't
some of it is
Elektra
whack.
come off of that movie?
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
There was like the spin-off with Elektra, but yeah, I saw something about how those those movies. I don't know how well received they were at the time. That was like right before. Was that like right before or right after? It was one of those. It was very early on in this like superhero.
They didn't
experience.
pull it off like Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire.
No, they did not. They definitely did not. But so to finish out this first issue, what's really interesting is that Kingpin is kind of staging this, and maybe we talked about this earlier, but he's kind of staging this little bit of a hostile takeover of the Daily Bugle and wants to kind of distort the way that they do their news and where they do the reporting to feature him and his company in a more positive light so that he can take over the city. Other characters that are introduced, Green Goblin is introduced fighting Kingpin in this first issue.
We don't know the identity.
We do not know the identity of Green Goblin in this universe, and we also know that Norman Osborn is dead. So who could it be? We'll find out. But also in the kind of culmination of this first issue is that Peter is told by Iron Man after receiving
like a hologram of
kind of a hologram shows up of Iron Man and basically tells Peter that this life that he's living right now is not exactly how it's supposed to be, and that he was supposed to be a superhero. He was supposed to be Spider-Man, and he ends up giving him the I guess in this case genetically modified spider, and basically says to him, you still have the choice. You have to choose to be this person. Are you ready to make that choice? And it ends with Peter obviously deciding to be Spider-Man, and we really get into a real Spider-Man comic. And then that's the end of issue number 1 there. Issue number 2, and each of these go through months. So the first issue is January. This is now into February.
It's actually a cool, just to jump in quickly.
Yeah, please.
It's got a really cool layout, like the panels. It's sort of like 3 major panels that set the scene on that first page of the issues, and they're all laid out the same. So it's sort of like another like uniformity to how they each begin. It's sort of got like set the scene panel, the month, January, February.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we'll get even more into all these things like how the pages are laid out and so on when we get into this analysis. And so this issue number 2 in February really starts off. The kind of interesting thing is that Spider-Man originally is also not in his, as we mentioned earlier, red, white, and blue suit. He starts off in the black suit, and you get this kind of first moment of him experiencing his powers, feeling the strength, feeling the agility that he gets from all of this. The next kind of big plot point here is that as Kingpin and others are taking over the Daily Bugle, Jonah and Uncle Ben decide to start their own newspaper. They leave the Daily Bugle, which is a pretty interesting concept of Jonah just not being at the Daily Bugle.
That's like his whole thing.
Right. And then kind of a lot of expectations get subverted, I think, in these first couple of, obviously this whole grouping of issues, but especially in these first couple here. But one of the first things that happens is that Peter's daughter finds out that he's Spider-Man. He comes home very, very late one night, and she, I guess, is still awake, and he takes off his mask, and she gets scared, and he has to have this whole conversation with her. But so one person has already found out that he is Spider-Man within the first couple, within the first, I guess, month of him actually becoming Spider-Man.
His cover is blown.
His cover is blown. And then we go on to find out that, not only is Kingpin seemingly not a great guy when it comes to taking over the newspaper, but he's very much revealed to be a underworld leader, a very powerful underworld leader with very powerful, I guess, bosses, masters over that. Peter's daughter finds out that he is Spider-Man, yet cover identity blown very early on. Kingpin is revealed to be a very powerful underworld leader. Not only is he taking over the Daily Bugle, but he's a very powerful underworld leader. And then Spider-Man also gets into his first real fight in this issue as well, fighting against a villain that maybe some of us know, but is kind of reinvigorated in this universe, Shocker. And the interesting thing that we end up learning in this and a little bit later on, right, is that Shocker has some, he's Shocker because he's electrocuting people with the gloves that he has, but where those actually come from is pretty interesting, and we'll learn more about that later on.
Shocker traditionally is sort of like a villain of the week type guy. He like robs a bank or whatever, and he's got these big gloves. He can,
punch and electrocute people and zap
them.
You from far away and whichever else.
It's different. There's other electricity-based villains that like Electro.
Indeed.
This isn't Electro. This is he's not Lightning Man. This guy just is like
big guy who wants to steal money,
punching,
and shocky punch you, for sure. And then this kind of culminates with Peter being in this fight, Spider-Man being in this fight, and then Green Goblin coming to aid him and participate in this fight towards the end. And then we move on to issue number 3, which goes into March, and this is basically you kind of start off with this cute little scene of Peter deciding what suit he's going to end up going with. He originally, like I said, is with the black suit in this series, which is pretty interesting. And so he goes through a couple of different suits. I think one of them here is the Ben Reilly suit as well. Also, his daughter is kind of participating in this. She's got her own little suit with goggles on, joining in the fun here. And so he goes through a couple suits, but they end up setting on the variation of the classic red, blue, little bit of white, black spider logo in the middle Spider-Man suit. And they go for, I guess his daughter joins him for a little bit of a joyride as well as he swing around the city. The next kind of thing that ends up happening is that Joan and Uncle Ben, after starting their own paper, they've got their first new office. They're talking to Peter about getting some information on Fisk and trying to understand what's going on there. And they obviously don't know that Peter's Spider-Man. And so he's kind of hearing this and saying, how can I help? They're saying, unless you can really, get to know this guy or find something around there, there's nothing you can really do. And so Peter takes it upon himself to go do a stakeout on Fisk to try and learn some more information about him, do a stakeout on Kingpin. Peter ends up finding himself, after staking out Fisk, he ends up finding himself, basically breaks into this fight between Green Goblin and Bullseye, and they end up being able to take him out after Bullseye kind of divulges this information, and that there's some darker workings that are going on in this world and in this universe. And at the end of this fight, Peter ends up his mask ends up basically disappearing, and his identity is revealed once again to Green Goblin. And Green Goblin, funny enough, in return, actually ends up showing himself, and you end up finding out that Green Goblin is Harry Osborn. Surprise, no more Norman, but Harry is taking on the Green Goblin moniker and the suit, and all the bombs and all the flying things and so on.
This is like another cool switch up because traditionally Harry and Peter are like best friends in high school.
Yeah, they're like childhood best friends or almost something like that. They've known each other for a long time.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And then also, I think there are runs where he is like a variation of Green Goblin or whatever. But this is this Green Goblin seems sympathetic. Like Spider-Man and Green Goblin are like from the beginning aligned. They're like on the same. They reveal their identities to each other. We have this panel where they're literally like standing.
Yeah, staring
at each other, but it isn't quite like confrontation. Like they're kind of just.
Squaring and you off. You also get the introduction to Green Goblin is him fighting somebody who we know is a villain, and so we would automatically assume that somebody who's willing to fight a villain is maybe a hero, but
enemy of my enemy type thing.
We're
not so sure yet.
We'll see.
But either way, regardless, it's a that's another just big subversion. You know what I mean?
Big subversion.
Green Goblin was traditionally a bad dude. Murdered Peter Parker's first girlfriend, literally chucked her off a bridge.
Yeah.
So we're primed. The whole first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, Green Goblin's the villain.
Yeah, very much the villain. Got all of the serum in his veins and is going crazy. And so that's basically the end of issue 3. Issue 4, we're jumping into April now. This is one where not only does the artist change, but interestingly enough, this is these next two issues, number 4 and number 5, are much more dialogue heavy. But so basically what happens in issue 4, Peter, MJ, and Harry and Gwen Stacy end up finding that Gwen Stacy in this universe is married, or at least partnered up with Harry Osborn. And they end up, going to dinner, talking about a whole bunch of business things, different stuff like that. Gwen Stacy ends up telling Mary Jane that she's interested in supporting J. Jonah Jameson and Uncle Ben's new paper. And we don't get maybe too much of that on right now, but it does seem like she may be able to jump in and help them with their little startup that's going on. While MJ and Gwen Stacy are off in the bathroom, we're talking about this business with Jonah and Uncle Ben, Peter and Harry start talking about their powers and about responsibility. And leading in with that, in this story, Uncle Ben is not the one who says the famous quote here. It's Harry talking to Peter at this dinner and says, with great power comes great responsibility, and basically offers up this moment to Peter saying, you have been given these powers, you have a choice to make. And again, you have the responsibility to do good things for the good people, for the good of the world.
And, as we just talked about, that's a huge switch up. And also kind of shocking to
nobody
hear.
had to die.
Yeah, nobody had to die. And also it's the villain. The Green Goblin is the one telling him this,
right.
which is wild.
Yeah, the classic villain, right? And in this one, we assume maybe off the beginning that he's not a villain, but we don't know yet. We don't know. I'm not even sure. We'll get into.
But it's a big sign.
Too.
That's maybe it's a red herring, but that definitely is a big sign for us as readers. Like, oh man, this character is delivering that line. Maybe we trust him for real.
Maybe we should trust him. He's the guy who seems to know how you're supposed to be as a hero.
He does say it with his face like cloaked in shadow, though.
Right.
So it is, it's all sort of, it's a little.
There's
bit
a little bit of ominous, ominous energy there.
It's a little ambiguous. We don't know. But
and so
as far as we can tell, Green Goblin, Spider-Man, sort of co-origin story, teaming up from the jump,
from the get-go. And so that leads us into issue number 5, which leads us into May.
Another thing that's interesting is issue number 5 doesn't start with that May thing.
Interesting. Who knows? Maybe we're still in April. Who knows?
Yeah, they break the convention.
Actually, the thing about this one is that it actually starts with a flashback, which is kind of the interesting thing. And so maybe that's why they don't start with May. So we start with this flashback of Harry talking to his dad, Norman, back when he was alive. And Norman is... I don't know. He does not like Harry at all, and he's very disappointed in him. Basically, says that he's still waiting for the day that Harry becomes a man, that he becomes a true member of the Osborn family,
somebody worthy of the family name.
Yeah, worthy of the family name. And right after he says that, boom, blown up in a gigantic explosion. I'm sure hundreds of people died in this gigantic explosion that hits the Oscorp Tower.
Crazy.
Yeah, and so he passed away, and this is how Norman dies in this origin story. Obviously, then you basically go on to Harry and Gwen Stacy dealing with the lawyers, having to get the estate figured out, and that leads to, obviously, with money and power, that leads to meeting with other money and powerful people like Kingpin, who ends up asking Harry a favor to help him keep Stark Industries is still around, even though. I guess something we didn't mention too is that Tony Stark in this universe also is dead, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, but it seems like Stark, maybe Tony's dad, whatever. Stark Industries is a thing, and that big explosion that we see kill Osborn Sr.
Norman.
Norman. It's pinned on Stark Industries.
Yes, it's pinned on
They're
Stark
sort of like
Industries,
they're the scapegoat. Everybody blames Stark, which we can sort of assume is not
right. It's not actually maybe what went down there. And so that's kind of the interesting thing is that Kingpin asks Harry to kind of help him with his resources to keep Stark Industries down while they're in the gutter down here. And Harry actually ends up declining and saying, realistically, that's not my problem. That's your problem, which is pretty ballsy, but maybe that's what you do when you've got probably billions and billions of dollars. Then the kind of interesting thing is that they end up learning that there's a bunch of this, some technology that's left over at the Stark area, right? Obviously, they end up finding things like Iron Man suits and stuff like that. And this is Harry, Gwen, and funny enough, Dr. Octavius, which is pretty interesting. I mean, this is kind of the only glimpse that we get of him in this first
Right.
6 issues.
Which is Doc Ock, who's another just iconic Spider-Man villain. He's
Very
also like the
iconic.
main villain of the second Tobey Maguire movie from our childhood.
Yep.
So he's another sort of instantly recognizable figure in Spider-Man world.
Very much so.
But yeah, so Harry, Gwen, and Doc Ock are going through all of this discovered Stark tech. And it sort of is. It's interesting. They sort of it's like the Green Goblin suit instead of like a serum or something that Harry gets given. The Green Goblin suit is fundamentally an Iron Man suit.
Yeah, basically,
it's like a green Iron Man suit that Doc Ock manages to put together out of the Stark Industries stuff that they just like inherited.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that they end up finding out too is that not only is there some of this Stark technology, but there's a whole bunch that's kind of scattered all over. I don't know if it's just the U.S., probably the entire world, that there's a bunch of tech that's scattered all over. And Harry has this flashback where he remembers fighting Shocker with Peter, with Spider-Man, and those gloves. He's like, wait a minute, those might actually be some Stark tech. And he remembers fighting against Shocker and basically ending up learning where he got those gloves from. And yeah,
that's another reveal too. Is sorry to jump in, but
no, please.
Peter's Spider-Man suit. We still don't really understand exactly. I mean, obviously he was bit by a spider, but the suit in this issue, it's not something that Peter's like sewn for himself. It's like
right. He does not build this.
Right. It's like it's also Stark tech.
Yeah, it's because like nanobot, probably something related thing, which is how he's able to swap all the different variations.
Right. He can just sort of make it. Yeah, exactly. He can change its appearance at will, and then also that was how Harry. Because Harry owns Stark Industries now, Harry was able to remove his mask. Like he was like, "Oh, this looks like Stark tech," and he. So it's more, things that sort of were confusing earlier are becoming clearer.
Yeah, they're starting to become clear, and we're starting to understand where a lot of this is coming from. And so, so Harry peels Bullseye completely out of the suit, and we end up learning is that Bullseye basically breaks down the kind of the things that he was touching on during their fight, which is that there are these greater masters, these greater underworld, and I guess kind of probably universal, we'll see, figures.
Bigger powers at play.
That are going on in the background that Harry and others need to be ready for. And the interesting thing, right, we were just talking about, who is this Green Goblin? What does he really mean? And kind of Harry's quote at the end of this chapter is, am I a boy or a man? A hero or something else? I guess we're about to find out. And you can see that, I think that there's definitely a lot of frustration there with what his dad said to him. And I think he's reeling with not only anger, but this, kind of want to, even though his dad is now passed, to kind of prove himself.
I mean, think about it now. Like this is sort of like a traditional Spider-Man story inversion, right? Where it's like Uncle Ben dies and tells Peter, Peter, I'm dying, I love you, great power, great responsibility, right? And that's sort of his hero origin story. Versus for Harry, it's his dad being like, you are literally not worthy of our last name. Right. I'm still waiting to be proud of you, and then immediately dies. Yeah. That is that sounds more like a villain
origin story for sure.
Right. I mean, maybe that's the start of his hero arc or whatever. But that sort of seems like an inversion.
You're right. That's a great point.
Hey, I'm about to die, and I'm not proud of you, and you are not stepping up to the plate. It's kind of it's kind of a similar. It's like you need to step up, but it's not from a place of like responsibility. It's from a place of like disappointment and expectation.
The normal father-son story of life. And so that's how issue number 5 ends up resolving there. And then we get into our last issue here in this paperback, which is number 6. And this is pretty interesting. So we kind of get this again, kind of like a flash forward, which is pretty interesting. We'll talk about this kind of time jumping around. But Peter basically comes back to his house looking just totally beaten up, bruised everywhere, and obviously his entire family is like, what is going on?
It's very obvious.
Peter doesn't even attempt to actually hide. He's like, oh, I'm clumsy, after looking like the entire city of New York beat him to a pulp. And then, he ends up basically divulging to his family that he's this superhero, that he is Spider-Man.
I am Spider-Man.
Yeah, I am Spider-Man. And then we kind of get this reverse jump where we find out, why is Peter all bruised and beaten up, and we end up learning that Green Goblin and Spider-Man went to Fisk's, I don't know if this is apartment, penthouse. Fisk Tower, his penthouse, to fight him and hopefully take him out. And what they end up learning is that, Green Goblin, Harry throws a bomb at Fisk, right? You're thinking, okay, yeah, he's a big guy, but something's going to get damaged. And then Fisk is totally unharmed, saying that, if things were different, he would have been harmed by something like that. But it seems like Fisk is not only, this underground kingpin, as they call him, but he's actually somebody who has powers of his own. And so
it's implied it's like the same kind of tech that Bullseye had.
Mm-hmm.
They've got this sort of like blue tattoo, sort of futuristic looking markings on their skin, right? And that again is that same mystery of somebody behind the scenes is sort of hooking up these villains with more power than they traditionally.
Something.
People that Kingpin traditionally is just kind of a huge guy.
Yeah, and he's super strong, right? But he's not.
But he's a guy.
Yeah.
In this one, he's sort of waiting. He Green Goblin and Spider-Man fall into his trap, and he just pulps them.
Yeah, he totally pulverizes them. There's one moment where you get a bunch of different shots back to back of Peter, Spider-Man just being slammed to the ground, being punched, and then Green Goblin, Harry calls his glider in, and it blasts through the wall, and Peter and Green Goblin end up making it out, and you kind of get to this final scene where Peter is back talking with his family, talking about them being safe, him being safe. He ends up talking with Mary Jane about what's going on and in what ways that's going to affect, obviously, their lives and so on. And then, they decide that they're going to do it together, and then you get this last moment of both of them swinging off into the wind together. And then that's where we end these 6 issues
First
here.
6 issues.
Very subversive, very different. Again, core themes are there, but very totally different story.
It's really flipping the whole thing on its head, and it's cool because a lot of it is sort of Easter eggs for fans. You know what I mean? Like one of the things we didn't mention, but it's just like a cool little Easter egg is like they go to a funeral in the first issue, and the priest that's at the funeral. It's a funeral for Norman Osborn.
Yeah, for Norman Osborn.
Yeah, so
you even get a glimpse of Daredevil.
Right, that's what I'm saying. The priest giving the eulogy is Matt Murdock, clearly, but he's not Daredevil. He just in this world became
who knows?
Well, maybe he's going to become Daredevil,
right?
Or maybe who knows, right? But there's the point that I was trying to get to is like there's a bunch of little Easter eggs for fans, but it's also just kind of like it's a larger reimagining and something that can be like a fresh story for everybody,
Right.
And it also this little bundle, like first 6 issues, this is sort of the like setting up the stakes. We've got the Spider-Man origin, we got the Green Goblin origin. We understand that they're sort of like a duo almost in this.
Right. We get their
timeline.
kind of main villain, right? We've got Kingpin. Really, we know that there's maybe some more nefarious things going on, but he's our first real setup villain that they have to go up against.
Right, and so all the the setting is there, everything is kind of ready to go, and this whole fresh Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man arc
Right,
is...
the scene is set.
The scene is set.
Indeed. And now that we've gone through a whole bunch of narrative-related things, let's get into a little bit of analysis on this whole paperback here and all these different comic issues that we've read through. The first thing that we kind of wanted to touch on, right, were what the main kind of themes were coming out of this. And we kind of boiled it down to a couple of things. It's about in this case, lost man finding his purpose, right? Feeling like there's something missing from his life and finding his purpose in being a hero. In this case, in being Spider-Man. It's about the importance of family, about the importance of the people that are close to you, not only in the fact that he's Spider-Man and has to keep them safe, but also like, this is real life. He's got a family here too.
It's different stakes than just like, a big thing with Spider-Man is, there's too many, he can't be a normal high schooler and do his responsibilities and keep up with his job and pay rent and maintain his relationships and be Spider, like that's kind of his thing.
Now do all that and then add kids to it.
Right, but now you're like a man
and
with a
wife.
family, right? It's the stakes are definitely not that it didn't matter when you're in high school, but it's kind of a similar way. It's like
higher...
everything feels like the end of the world in high school, and then
this would actually be the end of the world for sure,
right?
And then the last thing is really responsibility, right? Which you find in that classic quote there as well. And
taking risks. That's another part of it that I think they're really leaning into, like that. Readers are supposed to relate to, or maybe another thing is maybe the reader, the original Spider-Man story was for kids, right? Like Stan Lee was writing that for actual children, and like a lot of those comics were being sold in, like a little newspaper stand.
Right,
whatever,
right.
it was more of like and it wasn't even, it wasn't even Spider-Man, whatever. It was just amazing stories, or
Yeah,
they would
right.
just cut. They would just every month or every couple of weeks, whenever, I don't know how often it was published, but it'd just be like, here's this guy,
Yeah,
like
run down
just,
to the newsstand, spend 5 cents, and get a little issue of like fun hero stories.
right. And versus this is definitely maybe more targeted towards people in our stage of life,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, man, do we take risks? Do we do our stable job? Do we follow our passions?
Yeah, we've got really everybody taking risks. Obviously, Peter becoming Spider-Man, Harry Osborn doing everything with Green Goblin, Mary Jane and the entire family, right, have to take on the responsibility of knowing that he's Spider-Man and understanding what he's going to be going through.
And then we've got the whole Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy arc, where they're both accomplished business women. Mary Jane does branding, is like her whole thing,
Right.
And so they're clearly going to be a whole like women in business,
Right,
like,
but also Gwen is going to be helping out Jonah and Uncle Ben as well, right? So there's
With the
this whole kind
newspaper.
of like other arc that's going on there. So let's see. Let's jump into I can't remember what we ended up calling these, whether or not we want to call them
I think we said parameters. Right?
parameters. Parameters is a good one. Let's
But we had wait, we gotta pause and listen.
Our 5
because
things.
we had a whole conversation in our episode 0,
Yes.
where we decided had a whole conversation already about what we call these.
5 things, 5 pillars, 5 something.
Yeah, it's ongoing, but we're just gonna take a second and go check on
Check
what
what
we
we
said originally. We need some continuity going.
Indeed.
All right, we'll be right back. We're back.
We are back. We're back, and we're about to talk about our 5 concepts. Our 5 concepts, starting with level of abstraction. So this is probably the simplest way for any of you guys to think about this. Any of our one listeners. This is basically kind of how the simplest first thing is kind of how cartoonish versus realistic that it looks, and then there's this kind of third dimension as well, which is abstraction is the name of this whole thing, but you could almost imagine this like going from more realistic to go more Picasso-esque, getting into more shapes that kind of evoke feeling, evoke what they're supposed to be rather than directly show what they are. And so what's interesting about this collection of comics here is that we would say that these are pretty realistic illustrations in general across the board. If you've got a lot of things that I noticed definitely were in people's faces when you're getting up close. You're getting a lot of lines in people's faces showing a lot of, whether it be emotion or just age, for example, because not that they're old, but they're just older in their 30s, whatever else.
Right.
So you get a lot of that detail.
Yeah, so in you can go back and listen to our previous episode where we sort of break down these different concepts in great detail. That's basically all we talked about the previous episode, is talking. We sort of laid them all out,
Yes.
and talked about them, and then we talked about them again.
Indeed, we did.
In further detail.
Yeah.
We're still working on honing our structure for all this type of stuff. But yeah, so if you go back into Understanding Comics by our boy Scott McCloud,
Our boy.
you can find there's sort of a really well laid out pyramid where he talks about there's sort of like the realistic versus cartoony versus abstract, and we said that this one on that scale was around like an 83 or a 60. That doesn't mean much for us right now unless you go back and look at that, but we're gonna plot these things out.
Yeah, we'll plot this out, and who knows, maybe on the Instagram we'll show a couple of photos from the book to get you guys up to speed.
Absolutely, this is going to become more concrete and whatever. But basically, yeah. But it's exactly what Antonio was saying. There was lots of detail. It really wasn't terribly abstract. It's pretty realistic.
Yeah.
Obviously, what the people are, what these heroes are doing is not
maybe
realistic.
not realistic, but
the way they're depicted,
illustration, yes,
right.
is
It looks
realistic.
far more. It's just they're using more of a realistic and less abstract style for this. It's pretty grounded.
Yeah, pretty grounded. And so beyond that, we'll jump into panels and gutters, which is this is pretty interesting because one of the things that we talked about in our first episode was just that not only do each of the panels that have actual illustration and text in them matter, but the spaces in between are very important in their own right as well. And so this was pretty interesting. This kind of throughout all of the rest of these issues, or all the issues in this collection here, pretty consistently using gutters in between most of the different shots and panels that you're getting. Dialogue is often crossing the gutters and connects panels. Sometimes even some of the action shots, maybe some of the things that people, hands swinging or some kind of object that they're holding also sticks into a different panel. And all the gutters in this one are black as well, which is
Right.
really interesting.
Which is sort of, I think, the sort of classic look that you can imagine is, white, a little bit of white space between all the panels. But this one, I think it kind of makes for a more saturated look, and it also
all the colors really pop with that black.
Right, and each page is sort of like this cohesive piece, and the artist definitely does like a really good job of. It's not just on sort of like a laid out grid. He's using a lot of creativity, and a lot of artistic expression in the way that he's laying out the panels. They're really dynamic. They're changing shapes. We're going. He also utilizes. We talked before in the previous episode about the different kinds of panel transitions that our comic artists use, and for this one, there's a wide variety of transitions. There's a lot of scene to scene. There's a lot of action to action. There's a lot of moment to moment, which basically means that the storytelling is the time is kind of slowed down.
Yeah, it's slowed down time. It's pretty linear, right? You're really getting kind of what happens. You get kind of these scenes, and you get the kind of entirety of what's going on in that scene. We do have kind of, some specific moments that we pointed out. One was when Spider-Man is staking out Fisk, watching Fisk's towers before he gets into the fight with Bullseye and Green Goblin. That's where we actually get a what is that, scene to scene transition?
Yeah, we were talking about this before, and I think hold on, there's a siren. So one of the things we noted is that for a Spider-Man book, Spider-Man, he's always swinging around. He's doing a lot of movement.
Not a lot of swinging.
Yeah, it's pretty static. There's a lot of conversations. There's a entire issues that are like mostly dinner table conversations.
Right. Four is basically all the dinner table conversation, and 5 is a lot of conversation as well too.
So like examples of him swinging is like moment to moment where we see like an action, and then we see exactly what his next move is, and then we see a lot of his next move. A lot of it sort of more will be, it'll set up, he's about to go he's going to go do his Spider-Man thing. And then we'll get like 1 or 2 pages with some really big splashy panels of him swinging through New York. But we sort of have to fill in a lot of blanks. The artist is not showing us like he flips from this building and then he whips over here and then he swings
it's like
to this.
He generally flips his way there.
Right. We're just like
1 or 2 panels.
There he goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of the pages that Antonio just referenced that's really cool is it's when Spider-Man is staking out the Fisk building, and it's 4 different panels that are all from the exact same perspective. They're all the exact same dimensions, showing the same shot, and it's just like one day at a time. There's no dialogue. This is when there's sort of like it's an internal monologue of Peter, and that's kind of it's almost
kind of a combination of, I feel like, these, because I'd automatically think it would be kind of scene to scene because we're jumping across time and we're getting changing subjects. Obviously, it's still Spider-Man, but we're getting, birds and different things kind of come in and out. But it's also, it almost feels like the combination of like scene to scene and like action to action, where unless you kind of understood that time is changing, it almost looks like he's just kind of flipping around, just being bored, right? But this is over multiple days at once.
Right. It definitely was a standout page for us.
So going into our next concept after looking at the panels and gutters was use of color. And use of color, the color artist here did a really pretty fantastic job of bringing a lot of this to life. We
Matthew
talked about
Wilson.
Yeah, Matthew Wilson, the man himself. In this, we talked about a little bit how the gutters themselves are black, and so you get a lot of this really interesting contrast against the background. You have these kind of more muted moments where people are either maybe having conversation or doing some, I guess, non-actiony things. But that, in its own right, makes the moments where there is a lot of action really kind of jump off the page, especially color-wise. Obviously, there's a lot done there with the artist as well, but when it came to color here, it definitely jumped off the page. And for example, another one, when the Osborn building gets blown up, right, you kind of have these panels and pages leading up before that are a little bit more muted in their colors. Again, they're darker colors, maybe some blues, and then you have this big blast of color on that page, which really, it's a big moment, obviously in its own right, narratively, but it also becomes a big moment just in the illustration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely uses color to draw our attention to like important things. In general, too, the color is like really saturated.
Yes.
Like really, the color, like color is a big, very poppy and catchy. Like while the art style we were saying maybe leaned a little bit more realistic, the color definitely doesn't. The color leans way more expressive. Like the redheads are red. Their hair is
You get
red,
this really
red.
comic book kind of color there. Yeah.
It's cool. Everything like really pops off the page. He also uses color to set the scene really effectively. Like there's this whole conversation between J. Jonah Jameson and Uncle Ben, and they're in a spa. And that whole scene is like really bright. All these like, white misty clouds.
Yeah, it's like, and
everywhere.
it's two pages back to back, right? And this is kind of the interesting thing about, just to jump back a little bit, but the interesting thing about layout, right, throughout this whole thing is that you get this moment where those 2 pages are entirely on their own, and I think that maybe even are there black gutters?
There
are. So we still keep the black gutters.
So much white from all the steam.
So much white from the steam. You get this kind of whole moment that entirely captures you for that cover, and it's kind of funny because it's not necessarily like one of the even. Yeah, maybe it'll become kind of more of a narrative conversation, but even in that moment, it's not like the biggest part of the story that's going on, but you really get this whole world that you're kind of drawn into for just a couple of pages for that scene.
Another really cool use of color is the fight with Kingpin is red.
Very red.
It's really red, and so it really gives you that sense of danger. Like, oh man, the rest of the time, they're fighting the Shocker on a roof. Like no one's really at risk.
Yeah, nobody's
here.
in real danger.
And this is the first time where all of a sudden it's like, wait a second,
everything's red.
Our protagonists might be in trouble. Another thing that we noted that was pretty cool is they used color to highlight the Spidey sense.
Yes.
Which is a sort of one of Spider-Man's like key powers, right? Is he just has really good reflexes, but more than that, he can like sense when there's danger, sense when something's amiss.
Something is wrong.
More than normal people reflexes. He has like a sixth sense,
right?
And spider sense.
There's a couple of ways that we've seen them do this over the years, right? Sometimes it's like little wavy lines or different things like that. Right. And what it seems really in this collection of comics here is that you get this moment where every panel right beforehand, right, has this like, I think this is maybe the first time. Yeah, everything turns red, and you get these, a couple of panels beforehand where I think in that first fight, right before he kind of has to deal with Shocker, it's all kind of blue and like this greenish background, and then immediately you see everything. Peter's mask snaps on, and the background goes to red, and that something has changed. And this is again beauty of panel layout, where they're kind of having that last panel. It's the page turn right before that, right? So you have this moment of like, okay, Peter knows something's wrong, but I don't know what it is until I actually finally get to the next page.
Which is, again, like, this is such good storytelling from the artists. You know what I mean? Like, not just the script as written. Like, they're making the decisions. Okay, cool. This is where we're going to go to the next page.
Right.
There's going to be that little moment of suspense for the readers. Like, oh, man, what's about that? We turn the page. Boom. He's dodging. Again, it's all blue. There's this big explosion. Oh, he barely made it. And then the panel where he's, deftly dodging out of the way. The background's red again. It stands out. So it sort of is drawing, and that's something that the artist isn't even drawing. That's, maybe they made that decision as a collective, but that's really on the color artist.
The color artist as well.
So this is a great opportunity for us to jump back to the dossier and get a little bit more like history of comics context for color and printing. So basically, there was this whole assembly line of comic creation that Marvel was a big part of. So in the American comic book industry, especially from like the 1940s onwards, they started getting made in an assembly line. That's a very American
crank
thing.
Them out.
Right, totally. It's like, and you think about McDonald's, whatever. Yeah. This was a big innovation at the time across lots of things. Right. We were like Americans, efficiency. We're and so basically they broke up the creative labor into really specialized roles, and each one had like a specific task that let them hit deadlines more consistently, get lots of issues out. It sort of made Marvel. They had their own Marvel method that helped them, was a part of their success. But so basically, we can break those down really quickly. There's first the writer. They're responsible for like the story, the dialogue, the script. They often will submit like a full script. or plot outline to the visual artist. Some writers like Stan Lee, he pioneered the Marvel method, and they basically were more loose. They would give the artists more creative leeway. We'll talk more about that as we read some more classic Marvel comics. We'll save that conversation for later, but they would sort of have more of a loose outline and let the artist really place the story before the dialogue was even finished. So it was more a collaboration than a one-to-one process.
That's super interesting.
So that's, maybe DC, for example, was more constrained. Maybe it didn't flow as much.
Right,
Batman and Superman at the time maybe was a little more choppy. But so then after the writer, there's the penciler or the artist. They drew the initial black and white lines, like the art for the script. They drew the initial black and white line art for the comic
for all
pages.
the different scenes and panels.
Right,
and so on.
obviously based on the script from the writer. They were responsible for composition, character, visual storytelling, pacing even. That's another thing. Again, as we talked about, time moves through panels very deliberately. So the script, the same way for movies, like the script doesn't say exactly how long these shots linger and emphasis. So again, the artists aren't just like, they're just drawing the pictures. They're also telling the story. There's a little bit of directing almost there. Right? Absolutely. Yeah, fully. So then there's an inker, which is a thing that we don't even, I think that's not as much of a thing now. Not all comics have an inker. I don't think there's a credited inker for this story.
No, I don't think so.
But so basically they were people who would go over the pencil art with like black markers, finalizing the artwork for printing. They also would add texture, shading, depth, more line work, adding weight to certain things, you know what I mean? That's something you can definitely see. Like that sort of style is still very present. Like some lines are really bolded and draw your attention and have impact, and then some are more fine and detail oriented. So then after the inker, it goes to the color artist. They, obviously add the color. Today they get to work digitally, and that gives like so much flexibility. But originally this was a really difficult job because of printing, which I'll get into in like just a second. There's a lot of constraints on what they were able to do. And so a big part wasn't just, they just choose what color. It's like how, with the very basic set of primary colors that they have access to, how are they going to convey all of this different detail? Then fifth person often would be the letterer. They would add the actual text, the dialogue, narration, sound effects. Sound effects in comics are huge. Think about that. Like people think comics, it's like kapow, wham, whatever. The iconic sound effect, and oftentimes characters will have their own sound. Like one example that isn't Spider-Man is like Wolverine's claws, like they go snicked. We'll probably read Wolverine. Like there's these iconic things that will. Hulk goes smash.
Right.
Like there's all of these things where there's sort of, you think pop art, like there's this real cool like iconography with the lettering. Spider-Man's webs go thwip. They still to this day, I don't know, we can maybe look into when exactly that started, but that's a thing we know. Like he does his hand gesture, the web goes goes thwip.
Yeah, it gives you all the sounds that you're yelling as a kid, right? Before even hearing them.
They also, so they place the speech bubbles, they place the captions. You have to think about like having a good rhythm and flow that isn't distracting. Like you don't want to take away from the art, but you also want the it's not necessarily super linear, right? It's not just reading the text. Like our eyes have to know in what order to read all these bubbles. They have to generate that flow. So that's a whole thing. And then, the final, letterer, really important. They're not just writing down the words, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're having the creative input. And then there's the editor, who's the guy who, similar in journalism or more, publishing in general, but it's a sort of a similar role. But they manage the deadlines. They coordinate between all the different creators. They make sure the story and the art makes sense. They ensure the quality. They maintain continuity within the larger universe. That's especially important at Marvel and DC because people might be publishing. There might be a whole bunch of different stories getting told in New York City at the same time in a Marvel storyline. And that's one of the crazy things about Marvel, especially back in the day, is the continuity was super important to them.
Right. Yeah.
They wanted all those things to make sense and fit in together chronologically in like a really interesting way. So anyways, that's the rundown of the sort of assembly line of comics. Now it's a bit simpler now, but that's a sort of like part of the heart and soul of the comic medium. It's not just it's not just always. Sometimes there are like single people that will
do everything,
which is amazing, but it takes them a lot longer. It's a sort
and
of.
It's just a different process, right? There is something that maybe you want to do on your own, and there's also like the beauty that comes from things like this, where you have this team of talented people that are all working together to create this really interesting product at the end.
Super collaborative, which we both work in music and really appreciate the collaboration process for making
Absolutely.
songs. But so to wrap this up, we were talking specifically before we got on this tangent, we're talking about color, right? So early American comics were printed really cheaply, really quickly. And there were a bunch of constraints from how they were printed. So comics only could use 4 colors, it was known as CMYK process, which is, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black.
What a fascinating combination of colors.
That's all they had. So like it was different. Like one fact I know is like originally the Hulk wasn't green; he was gray because it was really hard to make green.
Yeah,
So there was all this early limitations, and so the artists had to choose from a really limited palette. They had to do really bold, contrasting colors because subtle gradients literally weren't even possible. They had to work with like pretty flat colors with hard edges, and then people innovated on that. Like some people people created dots and halftone patterns and different techniques to sort of create the illusion of colors blending together and making different shading. So, and that's part of the reason why a lot of the stuff we think about superheroes, like bright, bold costumes, that was because they had to stand out they had to stand out from the page amongst these other simple colors. And they also had to stand out on newsstands where people were going to be picking them up.
Right,
so that was part of the design wasn't just, okay, how can we convey this story well? It's like, this is a commercial product. They're trying to make eye-catching, eye-pop. Yeah, some kid walking past the newsstand, he's got a nickel or whatever.
Right, exactly.
He's going to get to pick up his stories.
Yeah,
which one is he going to grab? So color is such a relevant thing across the whole thing. And today, everything's colored digitally. So we have basically, you can do complex lighting. You can run all sorts of stuff. Printing is also higher quality. Paper quality is better. Like literally the whole thing is better. And so it's sort of interesting because all those problems are solved, but it also means without any limitations.
You have so many choices to make. And that's the interesting thing with the color here, right, is that you do really have like almost everything to pick from. And so you're spoiled for choice, which means you have to make really particular choices as well.
For sure. And, but one of the cool things is that a lot of artists still reference the visual language of like classic early comics. And so, bold colors, bold shapes, classic layouts, a lot of this stuff, even though they have lots of room to experiment and innovate and really, the possibilities are endless. There's still a lot of things that carry through and sort of are iconic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And relevant.
Absolutely.
So in summary, that's sort of a little
breakdown on color.
Breakdown on color, breakdown on the American comic book process,
Yes, indeed.
And so we can.
And that leads us back into our next concept after color, which is word-image relationships, which we actually touched on a little bit there with the letterer as well, in addition to the multiple types of artists that are factored in here. So we were talking about this collection of comics, and we pretty simply decided that between images and words, most of the panels kind of have both. There's probably more images. You'll kind of run into a couple of panels that are just images with no words, but it's around 55% images to 45% words. So it's pretty even.
We did not do like a statistical.
No, we did not. That's our guess. Our guesstimate.
Our best guesstimate is sort of
around those numbers. And then the other kind of interesting thing here is that there's it's almost entirely dialogue, and that's kind of dialogue versus like internal monologue or other different ways of like there's no real, I guess, narration from this other than maybe a little bit from Peter sometimes and a little bit from other situations and maybe some
it's mostly
months ago or whatever else.
Exactly. It's mostly captions like previously 2 weeks ago, which is another thing that we sort of wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that as well. The jumping around with time. There's a lot of that in this.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of jumping around.
Yeah, it definitely is. And
not just from Spider-Man.
yeah, indeed. Not just from Spider-Man. So, Yeah, pretty interesting with this. There was, I guess, we also talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Where there are, one of the kind of interesting things here is that at the very least, the artist for issues 4 and 5 is different than 1, 2, 3, and 6.
And this was very apparent to Antonio.
Yeah.
Before we were talking through the story, talking about what we liked, and
this is before I knew that there were multiple artists doing this.
Right, and he was saying, "Dude, how come Mary Jane looks different?"
I was like, "That is not the same person." Something, and I thought I was going crazy. I don't know why I didn't go back and double check the images to just not drive myself nuts. But it was pretty interesting.
A lot of people wouldn't know, especially when we're reading this trade paperback and it's one. It's
right,
all
it feels like all like one rather than like individual issues, which is it is. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so that's what it came down to is Antonio is just absolutely onto it, and the artist switches. Not only his style changes a lot.
But a lot more dialogue in those sections as well.
Right, which is maybe, we don't know the decision making of, maybe it was a deadline thing, maybe it was because they wanted that specific artist to try to carry these like really close, like those
a lot of close shots, a lot of people's faces.
Exactly, it's basically like faces, really precise expressions. There's less like big dynamic poses and more their expressions.
Right,
it's like they're having these conversations and it's a close-up of their face trying to convey a specific emotion.
Right, and what's also kind of interesting about that too, right, is that when we do get these close-ups, right, it is different from the other artist style where I would say this is a little bit more like, not by much, but a little bit more like cartoony, a little bit more like a stereotypical comic book kind of looking type of illustration here.
Right, it's definitely, the panels in this section are in a grid. They're for the most part, especially for like the dinner conversation with Harry and Peter and Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy. There, it's more traditional layout. It feels sort of distinct from the rest of the story. Honestly, the lighting is very.
Yeah.
It feels like it's like they're in this candle lit zone. Some of it is a little bit perplexing. Like one of the things that the artist, this artist specifically is for issues 4 and 5 is David Messina. His art is awesome. Obviously, we're not here to be critical in any way.
Yeah.
But one of the things I couldn't help
until I draw
is,
this, I'm not criticizing.
Right. Yeah. No shot. But he's drawing their faces reflected in the wine glasses so often, and it makes you think like, is he trying to say something? Is he trying to say that it's like temptation or whatever?
Or
I don't know.
Or that there's something more that's going on. Like there's these, you have like who's talking in that moment, and then you get this reflection trying to kind of piece together what the reactions are of the other people while that conversation is going on without actually showing them in that moment, which is kind of interesting.
It's like able to show two faces in one panel. But low key, it also just kind of seems like he might have just been flexing, like, look at me watch me draw these reflections.
And go ahead, bro, flex on them. That's all I'm saying. But
it's great. Yeah. It's very cool, but it is interesting and definitely notable that the characters are depicted a bit differently.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun, like, because you don't get a lot of maybe that kind of thing in like, maybe like in movies and TV, I guess TV in particular, you get, maybe different directors for different episodes, but you don't get like, like they don't swap out the actors for pretty similarly looking actors like halfway through. And so this is an interesting kind of cool thing that you get with comics, which is different than a lot of other mediums like this. And so that kind of, I guess, wrap things up for word image relationship. Now we can kind of move on to our final concept here, which is related to the line work. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but a lot of the line work in here is bold and thick. I know that one of the things that Ben talked about in particular when we were going on here was that a lot of these things are outlined in white for contrast and some of the darker images and so on. And, a lot of, like we said, it's interesting to see kind of the changes in the artistry there, where in the beginning there's a lot of thin, detailed artwork or line work in particular. And we definitely see that when it's close up on people's faces and sometimes in these fights. And then you get, still pretty detail oriented, but just a little bit different when you end up switching artists there.
For sure. And not only switching artists, like when exactly like what Antonio just said, when you have all these close ups of their faces, it's the lines themselves are thinner. They're very, they're showing a lot of texture, they're showing a lot of shading. And then when those same characters maybe are in more dynamic situations, they're the specific crosshatches on their hair or whatever becomes less important. It's about the big dynamic movements and poses and contrast between the foreground and the background and all that stuff. And it is interesting. You know, this is the type of stuff that Antonio and I wouldn't really think about intrinsically, but because we're trying to hold ourselves accountable is maybe the wrong word, but we're trying to direct our analysis here and try to pick out these factors.
It's pretty fascinating because, again, the fun thing about this is that we're not just only kind of enjoying the story, but we're really looking at this as the true and deep art form that it is.
We're trying to appreciate it, and it's also going to be fun as we read more and more comics from lots of different artists and lots of different writers. We're going to have a lot more appreciation as we see what a wide, all these different, the whole spectrum of line. Right now we're like, okay, well, the line work in this issue, we don't really know, but it's going to be a lot easier to talk about the difference when we read the next one, and we'll go, whoa, the lines in this one are totally different from the Spider-Man one. They're doing this whole other thing. We're going to, and also, our ability to explain it to you listeners and everything is only going to continue to improve. So bear with us as we figure this all out.
Appreciate you bearing with us. And I guess, one other thing to touch on here, we wanted to talk about, again, we're not, the experts on this, but we did have kind of some observations about this comic and things that we thought were interesting. And sometimes maybe a little bit confusing or whatever else. Like, I think the thing that jumped out at me, I know that when I was kind of looking through this again, right, a lot of this is kind of the interesting thing, because I think that there's obviously also a lot of purpose in this, but a lot of kind of like time jumps where like even the beginning of the chapter will start not at like the time that you just came from.
For sure.
It's like the next, or not chapter, but issue. You'll go from the end of like, one issue, and then the next issue will start with something that is not chronologically right after that. It'll jump, backwards or whichever else. And so it also makes it kind of interesting. It may be also this, may make it a little bit easier to read if you're buying issue by issue, right? You kind of have these kind of closed moments that don't maybe bleed into each other in the same way that they do when you look at this paperback here.
That's a good point. I have I'm almost all my collections so far, I've bought trade paperbacks or I've bought larger. If you're going to read a whole long arc, it's sort of more cost effective the more they're bundled together. So some of the bigger ones, they'll call them volumes, omnibuses. They'll have all these different ways they market it, but it's sort of more bang for your buck the more issues you can buy collected at one time, right? But I also have there's certain runs, like there's a Batman run that I hope we'll read that's sort of another reimagining of a Batman thing that's really good. And I read the first couple ones in trade paperback, but then when that series resumed again, I started buying the individual issues.
Sure.
And one thing that is definitely, when you have those issues, you finish that chapter, you want to read it again. You know what I mean? So you end up, instead of sort of going through the whole thing, it's like maybe the timeline, it makes a little bit more sense when you've read each chapter like one times, or two, one maybe three times while you're excited waiting for the next issue to come. Right. But it definitely is it's definitely a valid, I don't know if criticism's a little harsh, but it's a valid thing. Was we were, the time jumps could definitely be confusing. And sometimes seem pretty excessive. Like it'll, sometimes it's cool and it's clearly meant to build tension, or there's some kind of narrative mystery they're trying to build. But it also seems like sometimes they're just like, oh yeah, now we're here, now we're 2 weeks before.
I think that the interesting thing, for example, like we kind of started this, like the start of this story here is like after some stuff that you learn later has already happened.
Totally.
Right.
And you don't understand that until after. Like in the beginning, we were realizing like at what point does Peter, like we realize Peter got visited by Iron Man and given this orb with the spider in it and told to make the decision about whether or not he should be Spider-Man before even page 1, timeline-wise.
Right.
He's got that orb at the kitchen table in the morning with his kids. But we don't actually see the introduction of that orb until like the last couple pages.
Right, pages of the first issue.
So you don't even know until you go back and read it. When you're reading it the first time, you don't even really, you're like, is that a magic 8-ball? Like,
yeah. What is this kid grabbing? Like, he's like,
big? Like,
he's about to go read some fortunes or something like that.
So some of that makes sense, like we're saying, like there's narrative reasons for it, but it does get a little excessive.
But I would love to. I think one thing that would also be interesting here, and who knows who we'll hear from, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about though, because it's like they could, maybe they could just put that at the beginning, but they chose not to. Right. So I would love to hear, who knows, maybe there's something out there where they talk about why they do that.
Some of it's a little wacky too later on, where it'll be like 2 weeks ago, the previous month, and then it'll just say now.
Yeah.
And you're like, what's
like,
now?
where are we?
What are you talking about?
You're like now in comparison to a month ago, or like now in comparison to, so.
Now yeah, exactly.
But it's pretty funny. But it's very interesting, and it keeps you, I will say, it keeps you on your toes at the very least.
Another thing that we've already sort of talked about a few times, but definitely was a bit of a, was notable, was for a Spider-Man comic, it's pretty, like, there's a lot of conversation. There's not as much like swinging and fighting.
What I think is interesting too is that you don't get like the classic, like, I'm becoming Spider-Man. Like, I'm like learning how to do it. I like am slipping down the walls.
No.
I'm like, losing my grip on the webs or whatever else. I'm flailing through the air.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a learning arc, and him and Green Goblin, Harry Osborn, are kind of figuring things out together.
Right.
But for the most part, it's like Peter goes from, oh, I'm just a dad, to
I'm a guy whose like knees are probably starting to hurt, to just like flying through the air.
Fully capable,
the web slinger.
The web slinger. So there's a little bit of stuff like that. I mean, but again, these are all like justifiable decisions, because it can be like, oh, well, they already know, but it's like, to what extent? What's the target audience? Is this to people that are like a total newcomer?
Right, so that's a good question.
Because as we know, the original Ultimate Run, as we talked about at great length in the beginning of this episode, is like the whole point of doing it was to make it as accessible as possible, jumping on point. This is obviously a good jumping on point. It's an issue 1. It's of a new run, but it's, maybe there's an expectation that you know about this, right?
How do you not? Yeah. A little bit of what's going on.
And I mean, as we've talked about, everybody, whether they realize it or not, knows more about Spider-Man than you would think.
Yeah, than you think.
This is an icon. This is an icon.
Absolutely an icon. So that is our last, I think, bit of conversation there about this specific comic. It was a great kind of first dive into this. Again, fun to get in with a character that we all kind of already know and hopefully love. And then next time, do you want to talk a little bit about what we'll be getting into next time then?
Yeah, sure. So what we chose to read next for our next episode is called God Country by Donny Cates.
Yeah.
And this, I've already read this book.
I have never read it, so you'll be hearing me. You'll get all my oohs and ahs and whatever other noises I make.
But it's really cool. So I can talk a little bit about why we chose that one. And if you guys want to pick that up or take a look at it, before you listen to the next episode, that'd be awesome. You can participate,
read along, participate, and we'll be flipping through. And at some point, we'll get better about we'll get a camera up in here and show you what's going on.
Yeah, totally. We'll get the visual component figured out. But so God Country is a fully contained story. It's got a beginning and an end. It's like a trade paperback, like honestly, maybe a little bit bigger, but similar size, maybe like 6-7 issues, something like that.
Right.
But that's it. It's not an ongoing run. It's a story with a beginning. It's a short story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And
the guy did he do everything for this one, or did he?
No, there's an artist.
Okay, there's an artist.
Another
as well.
thing with it that's a cool. So one of the ways when I started reading comics during COVID is one of the ways you can figure out what books to read is you can kind of find a writer or find an artist that you like and sort of explore some of their stuff.
Right.
My first jump into Marvel, like the first arc I read, full arc beginning to end, was Donny Cates' Venom run, which is really popular and also was a big inspiration for we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll read that at some point, so there's no point talking to it, but Donny Cates is one of these guys that has ended up becoming a really sought after comics writer. He's a little bit divisive, he has his own sort of style, which I really like it, but maybe some people don't appreciate it as much.
We'll find out when I read it. I'll let you know.
But he's been given a lot of responsibility. He's written for DC, he's written for Marvel, he has his own stuff published through Image. He's got, he's ended up doing all this stuff, and God Country is one of his earlier projects that maybe got him a little bit of notoriety and attention and opportunity for these bigger projects. So that's sort of why we decided to take a look at that one, and it's going to be fun to read. I'm looking forward to rereading it, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it with you, bro.
Yeah, it'll sound good, and this will be my first time diving into it. My first time, I think, doing like a long form. Definitely first time doing like a long form kind of comic like this. So this will be a really interesting experience.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
This has been Kickback Comics.
Yeah.
Episode number 2.
Episode 2.
Spider-Man.
Maybe we're gonna label it 1. I don't know. Maybe the first one was our 0. We're figuring out
1.5, 0.5, something like that.
Exactly. Here
But
we are.
thanks
We're
again.
doing it.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for joining us, and we will talk to you next time about God's Country.
Yeah, God Country. Yeah.
God Country, there it is.
That's all right. You haven't read it yet.
Yeah,
bro.
I haven't
You're
read it
supposed
yet.
to know.
All right, thanks, everybody.
right.
Have a good whatever you're doing.
Peace.